She was hired to reject suitors until the Duke realized she'd rejected him too. The Countess of Ashmore's spring ball was, by universal agreement, the most anticipated event of the season, and therefore, in Arabella Thorne's considered opinion, the most exhausting. She stood where she always stood at such affairs, against the wall, between a rather aggressive potted fern and an elderly dowager who had fallen asleep 3 dances ago. It was the perfect position, close enough to observe the glittering spectacle of London's finest peacocking about the ballroom, far enough to avoid being trampled by said peacocks. The fern provided adequate camouflage, and the dowager's gentle snoring created a soothing counterpoint to the orchestra's enthusiastic assault on Mozart. From this vantage point, Arabella watched Lady Fortescue navigate her daughter through the crowd like a general positioning troops for battle. Cecily Fortescue was, objectively speaking, a diamond of the first water. Golden curls, cornflower blue eyes, a figure that inspired poetry from young men who had never before demonstrated literary inclinations. She was also, in Arabella's private assessment, about as interesting as a particularly well-dressed turnip. This was not Cecily's fault. She had been raised to be ornamental, and she fulfilled that function admirably. That she might have been something more, given different circumstances, was a tragedy Arabella tried not to dwell upon. "Miss Thorne," Lady Fortescue appeared at her elbow with the sudden silent menace of a hawk spotting a mouse. "You are not attending?" "Forgive me, my lady." Arabella straightened, affecting the expression of alert subservience she had perfected over 3 years of employment. "I was merely observing the Duke of Thornwood has arrived." Lady Fortescue spoke these words the way a devout churchgoer might announce the second coming. Her eyes had taken on a feverish gleam that Arabella recognized immediately. It was the gleam of a woman who saw titles and wealth and social elevation incarnate, all wrapped in one presumably human package. Arabella followed her employer's gaze across the ballroom and found the source of this rapture. Sebastian Hale, Duke of Thornwood, stood near the entrance in conversation with their host. He was tall, quite remarkably so, with broad shoulders that his expertly tailored evening coat did nothing to disguise. His hair was dark, nearly black, though silver threaded conspicuously at his temples in a way that should have aged him, but somehow did the opposite. His face was all sharp angles and severe lines, handsome in the way of a storm cloud or a particularly unforgiving cliff face. Even from this distance, Arabella could see that his grey eyes held all the warmth of a February dawn. "The Iron Duke," she murmured, half to herself. "Indeed." Lady Fortescue's voice carried notes of reverence and calculation in equal measure. 32 years old, unmarried, in possession of 4 estates, and an income that exceeds the imagination of mere mortals. He has not taken a wife because he has not found a woman worthy of his consequence. Until now. Arabella refrained from pointing out that Cecily Fortescue, for all her beauty, was unlikely to hold the Duke's interest through a single dinner course, let alone a lifetime of matrimony. Such observations were not her place. Her place was to stand by the fern, remain invisible, and perform her actual function when called upon. That function was about to be required. "Lord Blackwell is approaching Cecily," Lady Fortescue hissed. "Intercept him, now!" Arabella had already spotted the threat. Lord Blackwell was 60 if he was a day, possessed of a fortune derived from questionable colonial enterprises, and a reputation for inappropriate interest in women young enough to be his granddaughters. He was precisely the sort of suitor Lady Fortescue needed, eliminated wealthy enough to be tempting, but unsuitable for reasons that would only become apparent after a disastrous marriage. This was where Arabella excelled. She moved through the crowd with the ease of long practice, arriving at Lord Blackwell's side just before he reached Cecily. Her timing was, as always, impeccable. "Lord Blackwell!" She infused her voice with a brightness that bordered on the manic. "What an unexpected pleasure! I had so hoped to continue our discussion from Lady Melbourne's card party." Lord Blackwell's face, underwent a series of expressions: confusion, vague recognition, and finally, dawning horror. Miss Throne, was it? Thorn? Arabella smiled with all her teeth. I see you remember. Now, you asked me at Lady Melbourne's about agricultural innovations in the northern counties, and I fear I gave you a most incomplete answer regarding sheep husbandry. I'm quite certain I asked no such. The Cheviot breed, you see, has undergone remarkable development in the past decade. Arabella linked her arm through his and steered him firmly away from Cecily, who was now safely in conversation with a young viscount of acceptable fortune and amiable disposition. The wool quality has improved substantially through selective breeding practices that I find absolutely fascinating. May I tell you about the specific characteristics of fleece density? Lord Blackwell made a sound that was half protest, half whimper. Excellent. Arabella guided him toward the refreshment table with inexorable force. Now, the key factors in fleece quality are crimp, staple length, and fibre diameter. The crimp, you understand, refers to the natural waviness of the wool. She spoke for 12 uninterrupted minutes. She covered the history of sheep farming in Yorkshire, the economic implications of the wool trade, and the comparative merits of different shearing techniques. She described in exhaustive detail the ideal conditions for lambing season, the symptoms of foot rot, and the dietary preferences of various breeds, by minute 8, by minute. Lord Blackwell's eyes had glazed over completely. By minute 10, he was casting desperate glances toward any possible escape route. By minute 12, he manufactured a sudden recollection of a prior engagement, offered hasty apologies, and fled the ballroom entirely. Arabella watched him go with quiet satisfaction. Another unsuitable suitor dispatched. Another evening's work completed. She turned to make her way back to her post by the fern, already composing in her mind the report she would give Lady Fortescue, and found herself face to face with the Duke of Thornwood. He was even more imposing up close. Those grey eyes, which had seemed cold from across the room, were not precisely cold upon closer inspection. They were assessing, measuring, taking her apart and cataloguing the pieces with unsettling precision. That, he said, was the most impressive display of conversational weaponry I have ever witnessed. Arabella's heart gave an uncomfortable lurch. She had not heard him approach. How long had he been standing there? How much had he observed? I beg your pardon, Your Grace. She arranged her features into an expression of innocent confusion. I'm afraid I don't. Lord Blackwell looked as though he were fleeing a burning building. The Duke's voice was low, measured, with an undertone of something that might have been amusement if his face showed any inclination toward such frivolity. All because you educated him on sheep. I was merely making conversation. Arabella clutched her facade of guilelessness like a shield. Lord Blackwell expressed interest in agricultural matters. He expressed interest in Miss Fortescue. The Duke cut through her pretense with surgical precision. As have, I suspect, numerous other gentlemen who found themselves unexpectedly detained by discussions of sheep, or perhaps turnips, or the proper drainage of marshland. Arabella felt the blood drain from her face. In 3 years of performing this role, no one had ever seen through her. No one had ever bothered to look. I'm sure I don't know what you mean, she managed. I'm sure you do. They stood there for a moment, the impossible man and the invisible woman taking each other's measure. The orchestra played on. Dancers twirled past in a blur of silk and superficiality, and Arabella found herself in the profoundly uncomfortable position of being genuinely seen. It was the Duke who broke the silence. The wool trade, he said. You seemed remarkably knowledgeable. My father was a country vicar. The truth slipped out before she could stop it. His parish included several farming families. One learns these things, and one deploys them as weapons against aging roués who prey on young women. Arabella lifted her chin, meeting those grey eyes with more defiance than was probably wise. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Your Grace. I am merely Miss Thorne, companion to Lady Fortescue. I have no weapons at my disposal." The Duke's mouth did something. That wasn't quite a smile, but suggested the possibility of one. "Miss Thorne, I shall remember that name." He inclined his head in a bow that was precisely correct, and not a degree warmer, then turned and walked away, not towards Cecily Fortescue, as Lady Fortescue would certainly have preferred, but toward the card-room, where Arabella could no longer observe him. She released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Foolish, she told herself firmly. Dangerous. A man like the Duke of Thornwood had no business noticing a woman like her, and she had no business feeling whatever it was she was feeling. That flutter beneath her ribs was indigestion. The warmth in her cheeks was simply the heat of the crowded ballroom. And the strange, unfamiliar sensation of being known was nothing more than the alarm of having her secret exposed. She returned to her post beside the fern. The snoring dowager had woken and departed, leaving Arabella alone with her thoughts and the aspidistra's aggressive fronds. She watched the room with renewed vigilance, cataloguing threats and calculating strategies, telling herself that the Duke's observation changed nothing. So he had seen through her performance. He was unlikely to expose her. What possible motivation would a duke have for concerning himself with the employment arrangements of a lady's companion? No, she was safe. She would continue her work, continue her invisible existence, continue funneling her modest salary to the cottage in Sussex where her mother sat by the window, increasingly confused about the year and the day, and whether her daughter might be coming home soon. Everything would continue exactly as it had been, except that 20 minutes later, the Duke of Thornwood materialized at her side once again. "You've moved closer to the fern," he observed. "Defensive positioning?" Arabella startled so visibly that the potted plant's leaves rustled in reproach. "Your Grace, I didn't expect that is. I thought you had retired to the card-room." "I did. The play was tedious. Lord Carrington cannot bluff to save his life, and watching young Pembroke lose his quarterly allowance lost its entertainment value after the third hand." The Duke positioned himself beside her, surveying the ballroom with the air of a general assessing a battlefield. "I find myself more interested in your methodology." "My methodology?" "For the systematic discouragement of suitors." He spoke conversationally, as though discussing the weather or the quality of the canapes. "Sheep husbandry is inspired, I grant you, but surely you have other topics in your arsenal." This was unprecedented. In 3 years of being invisible, Arabella had never been sought out, not once, not by anyone. And now the most eligible bachelor in England had sought her out twice in a single evening to discuss her peculiar occupation. She should deploy her own weapons against him. Lady Fortescue would want him directed towards Cecily, not wasting his valuable attention on the hired help. One spirited discourse on the medicinal properties of fennel would send him fleeing, as it had sent so many before him. She opened her mouth to begin. "Root vegetables," she said. "The cultivation of root vegetables offers endless opportunities for discussion. Take the turnip, for instance. The Brassica rapa requires careful attention to soil composition." "Clay-heavy soil with adequate organic matter," the Duke interrupted. "Slightly acidic pH. Consistent moisture without waterlogging. Continue." Arabella faltered. "You know about turnip cultivation?" "I know about everything that happens on my estates." Those grey eyes were watching her with unsettling interest. "Including the agricultural operations. Try again, Miss Thorne." For the first time in years, Arabella found herself without a ready conversational weapon. He had parried her sheep, deflected her turnips. Her usual tactics lay in ruins around her feet. "I could discuss the proper preservation of root cellars," she attempted weakly. The importance of ventilation systems. Fascinating. Tell me instead why a vicar's daughter ended up as professional bore to London's unwanted suitors. The bluntness of it stole her breath. She should be offended. She should retreat behind huffing protestations of propriety and feminine delicacy. Instead, she found herself fighting an absurd urge to laugh. "That," she said, "is a remarkably impolite question." "I am a remarkably impolite man. Ask anyone." He gestured vaguely toward the ballroom at large. "They'll tell you I'm cold, arrogant, impossible to please, and utterly without social graces. The Iron Duke, they call me. I believe it's meant to be insulting, though I find it rather efficient. It discourages precisely the sort of tiresome social overtures that you yourself specialize in. Then we are alike." The words escaped before Arabella could prevent them. "We both cultivate reputations designed to keep people at a distance." Something flickered in those grey eyes, surprise perhaps, or recognition. For a moment, just a moment, the severe lines of his face seemed to soften almost imperceptibly. "Perhaps we are," he said quietly. The moment stretched between them, strange and charged. Arabella felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, felt the careful architecture of her invisible life developing hairline fractures. This would not do. This would not do at all. "Lady Fortescue's daughter is quite accomplished on the pianoforte," she said abruptly, wrenching the conversation back towards safer ground. "I believe she will be performing later this evening. Perhaps your Grace would enjoy—" "I would not." "The supper-room offers excellent—" "I'm not hungry." "The card-room, then, despite Lord Carrington's deficient bluffing—" "Miss Thorne," the Duke's voice cut through her desperate redirections, "I came back to speak with you, not to be shuffled toward your employer's daughter like an unwanted parcel." Arabella felt heat creeping up her neck. "I cannot imagine why your Grace would prefer my company to—" "Can't you?" The question hung between them. Around them the ball continued, its glittering whirl dancers laughing, gossips whispering, the machinery of the marriage mart grinding on as it had for decades. None of it touched this small pocket of stillness, where a duke and a companion stood facing each other, with far too much honesty for either's comfort. "You see things," the Duke said finally. "You watch and notice and understand. Everyone else in this room is performing. You are observing. It is restful." Arabella's carefully constructed walls trembled. "I am also performing, Your Grace. As you yourself pointed out, I am a professional bore. My entire purpose here is pretense. Yet you dropped the pretense with me." He tilted his head, studying her. "After you thought you'd succeeded in driving me away, you forgot, for just a moment, to be boring. You were sharp and clever and real." She had no response to this. He was right, and they both knew it. She had slipped just for an instant, just for a single unguarded comment, and he had seen the woman behind the mask. It was terrifying. It was, if she were honest with herself, also terribly wonderful. "I must return to Lady Fortescue," she said, though her employer was nowhere in sight. "She will require me." "No doubt." The Duke stepped back, allowing her the escape she sought, but before she could flee, he spoke again. "Miss Thorne, does your campaign against unsuitable suitors extend to suitable ones as well?" That depends on Lady Fortescue's assessment." "And if Lady Fortescue assessed a suitor as suitable, would you still deploy your arsenal?" The question was not, Arabella realized with a thrill of alarm, entirely hypothetical. "I follow my employer's instructions," she said carefully. "A diplomatic answer." Something almost like amusement crossed his severe features. "I look forward to our next encounter, Miss Thorne. I suspect you have many more topics in reserve, and I confess myself curious to hear them all." He walked away, and Arabella stared after him, heart pounding, mind racing, wondering what exactly had just happened, and why it felt so very much like the beginning of something she could not afford. Lady Fortescue was, to put it mildly, beside herself. "He spoke to you?" She paced the confines of her private sitting-room the following morning, her silk wrapper billowing behind her like battle standards. "For how long?" "A few minutes, my lady." Arabella kept her eyes on the mending in her lap, presenting the very picture of a humble servant with nothing to hide. "I believe he mistook me for someone of consequence." "Mistook?" Lady Fortescue sputtered. "The Duke of Thornwood does not make mistakes. He has not made a mistake in 13 years of managing the largest dukedom in England. There must be a reason." The reason, Arabella knew, was that the Duke had recognized a kindred spirit, another performer, another soul in hiding. But this was not an explanation that would satisfy her employer. "Perhaps he was simply bored," she offered. "Bored!" Lady Fortescue stopped pacing, and fixed Arabella with a calculating stare. Yes, that must be it. You were convenient, nothing more. A moment's diversion before he moves on to matters worthy of his attention." "Undoubtedly, my lady. In any case, this presents an opportunity." Lady Fortescue's eyes had taken on that familiar predatory gleam. "He noticed our household. He engaged with a member of our party, however insignificant. The door is open, Miss Thorne. We must walk through it." Arabella felt a chill of foreboding. "My lady?" "I shall invite him to the country. A house party at Fortescue Park. 2 weeks of rustic entertainments, rides, picnics, evening musicales, intimate gatherings where Cecily can shine without the competition of an entire ballroom." Lady Fortescue rubbed her hands together with unconcealed glee. "It is perfect. He will fall in love with her within a fortnight. I am certain of it." "And if he does not attend?" "He will attend." Lady Fortescue's smile was cold. "The Duke of Thornwood has been avoiding house parties for years. But he spoke to you, Miss Thorne. He sought you out twice. That suggests he found something of interest in our little circle, does it not?" Arabella's stomach twisted. She wanted to protest, to point out that the Duke's interest clearly had nothing to do with Cecily, to warn Lady Fortescue that her scheme was built on a fundamental misunderstanding, but such honesty would only provoke questions she could not answer. "Yes, my lady," she said instead. "I imagine you are correct." "Of course I am correct. I am always correct." Lady Fortescue swept toward the door, already composing invitation lists in her head. "You will be useful in this, Miss Thorne. The Duke clearly finds your strange conversational habits amusing. You will keep him entertained and in good humor while I position Cecily appropriately." "Keep him entertained?" "Yes. Chat with him about sheep or whatever it is you do. Occupy his attention during the less important hours so he is fresh and receptive when it matters." Lady Fortescue paused at the threshold, glancing back with an expression that was almost kind. "I know it seems a great condescension, but the Duke is odd. Everyone says so. Perhaps he simply prefers odd company." She departed, leaving Arabella alone with her mending and her spiraling thoughts. Keep him entertained. Occupy his attention. As if the Duke of Thornwood were a fractious child to be distracted with bright objects, while the adults conducted real business. But Lady Fortescue did not know what Arabella knew, that the Duke had seen through her pretense, that he had recognized her genuine self beneath the boring camouflage, that he had sought her company not to be distracted, but to be understood. This was dangerous. This was impossibly, catastrophically dangerous. Arabella was 25 years old, without fortune or connections, employed in a position that paid barely enough to keep her mother comfortable in her small Sussex cottage. She had no business entertaining feelings for a duke. She had no business entertaining feelings for anyone. Her life was a careful equation of necessity, every variable balanced to produce survival, and nothing more. The Duke of Thornwood was not a variable she could afford. Yet when the invitation was sent, and when, 3 days later, the Duke's acceptance arrived by special messenger, Arabella felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. She crushed it immediately, of course. She was very practiced at crushing hope. But a small, traitorous part of her heart refused to be crushed entirely. Fortescue Park in late spring was, Arabella had to admit, genuinely lovely. The estate sprawled across several thousand acres of Kent countryside, all rolling hills and ancient oaks and gardens that had been cultivated for generations. The house itself was a handsome Georgian pile, large enough to impress without being so ostentatious as to seem vulgar. Lady Fortescue had spared no expense in preparing for her prize guest. Fresh flowers graced every room. The wine cellar had been restocked with only the finest vintages, and the cook had been drilling for weeks on the elaborate menus to come. Arabella stood at the window of her small third-floor room, watching the carriages arrive. Lord and Lady Pemberton came first, an elderly couple of impeccable lineage and tremendous dullness. They were followed by Sir Richard Crane and his wife, social climbers whose presence puzzled Arabella until she remembered that Lady Crane was distantly connected to the Duke's late mother. Then came the Honourable Frederick Waverley, a young man of amiable disposition and empty pockets who was, Arabella suspected, being considered as a backup option, should the Duke prove unattainable. And finally, the ducal carriage appeared on the drive. It was absurd how her heart leapt at the sight of it. Absurd and embarrassing and dangerous. Arabella turned from the window and busied herself with unpacking, determined not to be caught mooning like a lovesick housemaid. She was here to perform her usual function, to discourage unsuitable suitors from approaching Cecily. The Duke of Thornwood was the opposite of unsuitable. Therefore, her function did not apply to him. Her function was, apparently, to keep him entertained. She would do exactly that. She would be professionally entertaining, boring, of course, tedious as always, but somehow amusingly tedious in a way that occupied his attention without engaging his interest. It was a fine line to walk, but she had walked fine lines for 3 years. She could manage 2 weeks. The first test came at dinner that evening. Lady Fortescue had arranged the seating with military precision, the Duke at the place of honour, Cecily at his right hand, herself at his left. Arabella was relegated to the far end of the table between Frederick Waverley and Sir Richard Crane, where she could observe but not participate. It was, she told herself, exactly where she belonged. The meal progressed through its many courses with the typical rhythms of country house entertainments. Conversation flowed around topics deemed suitable, the weather, the roads, the latest on dits from London. Cecily smiled prettily and contributed little. Lady Fortescue dominated the discussion with practised social brilliance. The Duke. The Duke was watching Arabella. She felt his gaze from across the table, that cool grey assessment that seemed to catalogue her every movement. When she lifted her wine-glass, his eyes followed. When she turned to answer some tedious query from Sir Richard, she could sense his attention sharpening. It was unnerving. It was also, against all wisdom, thrilling. After dinner, the party retired to the drawing-room for the inevitable musical entertainment. Cecily was prevailed upon to perform a Beethoven sonata, executed with technical competence and total absence of feeling. Arabella listened from her usual position at the room's edge, clapping politely at the conclusion, preparing to fade into the wallpaper for the remainder of the evening. The Duke had other plans. Miss Thorne. He appeared at her side with his now familiar silent approach. Would you care for a turn about the room? I find myself in need of air, and I suspect you do as well. The invitation was perfectly proper. A turn about the room was exactly the sort of mild exertion recommended for digestion, yet Arabella hesitated, aware of Lady Fortescue's eyes upon them, calculating and suspicious. I would not wish to presume upon your Grace's patience, she said carefully. I am but a companion, hardly worthy of Miss Thorne. His voice dropped, low enough that only she could hear. I have endured an hour of Miss Fortescue's conversation. It consisted of 3 observations about the weather, 2 compliments on the excellence of the soup, and no fewer than 7 declarations that she finds everything quite nice. If I do not speak with someone who possesses actual thoughts in the next 5 minutes, I shall do something regrettable. Please?" It was the please that undid her. Arabella took his offered arm. They walked. "You are unkind to Miss Fortescue," she said quietly, as they made their slow circuit of the drawing-room's perimeter. "She is young, and has been raised to be ornamental. It is not her fault that her education has not valued wit." "I did not say it was her fault. I merely said I could not endure more of her conversation." The Duke glanced down at her with something almost like respect. "You defend her, despite being employed to make her more attractive to suitors like myself?" "I am employed to discourage unsuitable suitors. You, I am given to understand, are highly suitable." Arabella kept her voice light. "Therefore, you are not my concern." "Am I not?" The question carried undercurrents she chose not to examine. "Tell me about your home," she said instead. "The country estate. What is it like?" If the change of subject surprised him, he gave no sign. "Thornwood Manor. It's in Northumberland, draughty, ancient, perpetually in need of repair, and the most beautiful place I have ever known." "You love it?" "I do." The admission seemed to surprise him. "I don't speak of it often. Most people find the northern estates unfashionable, too remote, too cold, too far from London's amusements." "And you find London's amusements?" "Tedious, superficial, exhausting." He paused. "Present company excepted." Arabella felt warmth bloom in her chest, and immediately suppressed it. "You barely know me, Your Grace. I know you see clearly. I know you speak honestly when you forget to be careful. I know you have depth that you conceal behind discussions of sheep." He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "I know that in a room full of performers, you are perhaps the only person who understands what it is to wear a mask." The air between them seemed to thicken. Arabella was acutely aware of the other guests, Lady Fortescue watching from across the room, Cecily looking up from her music with vague curiosity, Frederick Waverley whispering something to Lady Pemberton. "Your Grace," she said softly, "this is not wise." "No, it isn't. I am a lady's companion. I have no fortune, no connections, no prospects. I am not someone you should be seeking out." "I know." He held her gaze, those grey eyes warm now in a way she had not believed possible. "I am seeking you out anyway." Arabella's heart was hammering. She needed to step back, to retreat to her wallflower position, to become invisible again before this impossible attraction caused irreparable damage to her carefully constructed life. "I cannot," she began. "Miss Thorne." Lady Fortescue's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "I believe I require your assistance with the card tables. Immediately." Arabella stepped back from the Duke as if burned. "Of course, my lady, immediately." She fled to Lady Fortescue's side, arranging card tables with hands that trembled slightly, feeling the Duke's eyes on her back like a physical touch. When she dared to glance up again, he had withdrawn to a window seat, his expression once again cold and remote. But she knew now what lay beneath that coldness. She had seen it, just for a moment. And, heaven help her, she wanted to see it again. The following days fell into a pattern as dangerous as it was intoxicating. Each morning, the house-party guests assembled for breakfast, after which they dispersed to various entertainments, riding for the gentlemen, needlework and gossip for the ladies, exploratory walks through the gardens for those who preferred neither. Lady Fortescue manoeuvred endlessly to position Cecily in the Duke's path, arranging picnics and musicales and impromptu drawing, sessions where her daughter's modest artistic talents could be displayed, and at every turn somehow the Duke managed to find Arabella instead. It was masterful, really, the way he did it. He never approached her directly when others were watching. He simply appeared. In the library when she had slipped away to find a book, on the terrace when she had stepped out for air, at the edge of the rose garden when she had walked there, believing herself alone. "You're following me," she accused him on the third day, when he materialized beside a particularly magnificent climbing rose. "You're making yourself easy to follow," he countered. "If you wished to avoid me, you would stay in the drawing-room with Lady Fortescue." "Perhaps I simply enjoy the gardens." "Perhaps." He reached out to touch a rose bloom, deep crimson and half unfurled. "Tell me something true, Miss Thorne." The request startled her. "True? Something about yourself. Something you don't tell anyone." He let his hand fall from the rose. "I will trade you truth for truth." It was a game, a dangerous game, played by two people who had both forgotten how to be genuine. Arabella knew she should refuse, should retreat behind her mask, should bore him away with exhaustive discussion of horticultural practices. Instead, she said, "My mother is ill." His expression shifted surprise, then something softer. "I'm sorry. Her mind wanders. She forgets things. Sometimes she forgets me." The confession hurt to speak aloud. She had told no one this, not even Lady Fortescue, who believed her mother merely delicate. "I send money every month. A nurse lives with her now, but I cannot visit often, and when I do, she sometimes does not know who I am." Silence stretched between them. The roses nodded gently in the breeze. "Your turn," Arabella said, because the vulnerability of her own confession had left her raw, exposed, desperately in need of reciprocity. The Duke was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I was engaged once, 7 years ago. To Lady Marguerite Ashby, the diamond of her season, everyone said. Beautiful, charming, from an excellent family. I thought myself fortunate beyond measure. What happened? She jilted me. Publicly, dramatically, in front of half the ton." His jaw tightened. She had accepted my proposal, but discovered, belatedly, that she preferred the Earl of Denham. He had less money, and fewer estates, but considerably more charm. At a ball, the Ashworth Spring Ball, in fact, the very one where I met you, she announced that she could not marry a man who made her feel as though she were being assessed for purchase at a livestock auction. Arabella flinched. "That is extraordinarily cruel." It was honest. He met her eyes, and she saw there the ancient wound, not quite healed. "I am not warm, Miss Thorne. I do not know how to be. My father died when I was 19, and I spent the next decade learning to manage a dukedom, while everyone around me tried to take advantage of my youth and inexperience. I learned to trust no one. I learned to evaluate every interaction for hidden motives. I became, in essence, exactly what Lady Marguerite accused me of being. You are not. I am, or I was, until recently." He reached out, and for a breathless moment Arabella thought he might touch her, but he only adjusted a trailing rose vine that threatened to snag her sleeve. "Until I met a woman who tried to bore me to death with sheep facts, and instead showed me something I had forgotten was possible." Arabella could not speak. Her throat had closed around a tangle of emotions she could not name. "Miss Thorne." He spoke her name like a question, like a hope, like something fragile and precious. "Arabella." Her given name on his lips was overwhelming. No one called her by her given name, not since her father died, not since her mother's mind began its slow dissolution. She was Miss Thorne, the companion, the invisible bore, the woman behind the mask. "Sebastian," she whispered back, because if they were trading truths, she might as well trade this one too, that she had learned his given name, that she had thought it in her most private moments, that she had wondered what it might sound like in her own voice. His breath caught. For an endless moment they stood among the roses, two wounded people on the verge of something neither could afford. Then footsteps on the gravel path shattered the spell. "Your Grace!" Frederick Waverley's cheerful voice preceded him around the hedge. "Lady Fortescue sent me to find you. There's to be archery, and she particularly hoped you might instruct Miss Fortescue on proper form. The Duke's face closed like a door slamming. Of course, I shall attend presently. Waverley noticed Arabella belatedly. Oh, Miss Thorne, didn't see you there. Enjoying the roses, are you? Indeed. Arabella's voice was steady, miraculously so. The climbing varietals are particularly fine this year. She walked away before the Duke could say anything more, her heart pounding, her mind reeling, the taste of his name still on her lips. The archery was interminable. Arabella watched from beneath a parasol as Sebastian. She could not think of him as anything else now, not after the roses demonstrated the proper stance to Cecily, adjusting her grip on the bow with impersonal efficiency. Lady Fortescue beamed with proprietary satisfaction. The other guests applauded politely as Cecily's arrow struck the outer ring of the target. None of them noticed the tension in the Duke's shoulders. None of them saw the way his eyes sought Arabella across the lawn, finding her again and again, as though orienting himself by her presence. This had to stop. She knew it with the cold clarity of a woman who understood her own precarious position. Whatever this was between them, it could lead nowhere. He was a duke. She was nothing. He needed an heir. She could offer nothing but herself, which was not nearly enough. And yet, when the archery ended and the party dispersed, she found herself walking toward the lake rather than the house, and she was not surprised when, half an hour later, Sebastian appeared at her side. "You're avoiding me," he said. "I'm trying to." She kept her eyes on the water, still and dark beneath the afternoon sun. "You make it difficult." "I know." He stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, not quite touching. "I should stop. I should return to London, find some appropriate young lady to marry, produce an heir, and forget I ever met a vicar's daughter who weaponized turnip cultivation." "Yes, you should." "I cannot." The words were quiet, fierce, impossible. Arabella closed her eyes against the sting of sudden tears. "You must," she whispered. We cannot." "Why not?" "Because I am no one." The truth burst from her, raw and painful. "Because I have nothing to offer you but conversation. Because Lady Fortescue employs me to bore away suitors, and I have bored away dozens, and the only reason I have not bored you is that I—" She stopped, unable to say it. "That you what?" He turned to face her, and his hand came up to cup her cheek with devastating gentleness. "That you feel what I feel? That despite every reasonable objection, you want this as much as I do?" A tear escaped, trailing down her cheek to dampen his fingers. "Wanting is not enough. Wanting has never been enough for people like me." "Then let me make it enough." His thumb brushed away the tear track. "Arabella, I have spent 13 years building walls so high that no one could reach me. You scaled them in a single evening, and you didn't even try. You simply saw me, as I saw you. I tried to bore you away." A laugh that was half a sob escaped her. "I discussed sheep for 12 minutes, and I have never been less bored in my life." He kissed her. It was gentle, almost questioning a brush of lips that asked permission even as it took. Arabella had been kissed before, twice, by young men who had not mattered, and whose names she had since forgotten. Those kisses had been perfunctory, disappointing, easily dismissed. This was nothing like those kisses. This was a revelation. This was every romantic novel she had secretly devoured, every dream she had forbidden herself, every hope she had ruthlessly crushed, rising up in defiance. She kissed him back, her hands fisting in his lapels, pulling him closer, pouring 3 years of loneliness and invisibility into the press of her mouth against his. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "This is madness," she said. "Complete madness," he agreed. "Lady Fortescue will dismiss me." Then I will hire you. To do what? To manage my household, to run my estates, to argue with me about drainage systems and keep me from becoming too cold and too rigid and too alone. His forehead rested against hers. To be my wife, if you will have me. Arabella's heart stopped, simply stopped, between one beat and the next. You cannot mean... I have never meant anything more in my life. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. I know this is sudden. I know we have known each other only days, but I have spent years being courted by women who saw only my title and my fortune. And in all that time, not one of them has ever truly seen me. You saw me immediately. You saw through every wall I had built, and instead of fleeing, you stayed. I tried to make you flee, and when you couldn't, you showed me yourself instead. His hands cradled her face, warm and sure. I am not asking for an answer now. I am asking for time. The house party continues for another week. Give me that week to prove that this is real, that I am real, that what I feel for you is not passing fancy, but the foundation of something lasting. Arabella wanted to say yes. Every fiber of her being yearned toward him like a flower toward sunlight. But she was practical, always practical, and practicality demanded honesty. My mother, she said quietly. If I were to accept, she would need care. Better care than I can currently provide. I would not leave her to fend for herself, not even for a dukedom. She would live with us, if you wished, or in the dower house, with the finest care money can provide. Arabella, I have more resources than I can spend in 3 lifetimes. If your concern is for your mother's well-being, consider that concern addressed. And society? A duke marrying a companion, the scandal would be, society can hang itself. He spoke with sudden vehemence. I have spent my entire adult life adhering to society's expectations, and it has brought me nothing but cold rooms and colder relationships. I will not sacrifice genuine happiness to satisfy gossips who will find something else to whisper about within the fortnight. Arabella's resistance was crumbling. She could feel it falling away, stone by stone, revealing the hope she had tried so desperately to suppress. Give me the week, Sebastian said again. Let me court you properly, or as properly as possible, under Lady Fortescue's suspicious eye. Let me prove that this is not impulse or infatuation, but something worth building a life upon. She should refuse. She should retreat to her small room and her sensible plans and her invisible existence. Instead, she said, yes. His smile broke across his face like sunrise, transforming the stern lines into something breathtaking. Yes? Yes, I will give you the week. She reached up to touch his face, marveling at the reality of him. I make no promises beyond that. But yes, I will. I will let you try. He kissed her again, and this time there was joy in it, fierce and bright. Arabella let herself sink into the feeling, let herself believe, just for a moment, that this impossible thing might actually be possible. They returned to the house separately by different paths, careful to preserve discretion. Arabella entered through the servants' entrance and climbed the back stairs to her room, her lips still tingling, her heart still racing. She was halfway down the corridor when Lady Fortescue stepped from the shadows. Miss Thorne? Her employer's voice was ice. I believe we need to have a conversation. Arabella's soaring heart plummeted. Lady Fortescue's expression held no warmth, no mercy, only the cold calculation of a woman who had seen something she did not like. My lady, in my sitting room, now. Lady Fortescue swept away, and Arabella followed, hope warring with dread in her chest. The week had barely begun, and already her careful life was fracturing around her. Whatever happened next, she realized with terrifying clarity, nothing would ever be the same. Lady Fortescue's sitting room was decorated in shades of cream and pale gold, elegant and expensive, and utterly without warmth. Arabella had stood in this room many times over 3 years of employment, receiving instructions and delivering reports, always careful to project the appropriate deference. Tonight, the familiar surroundings felt hostile, the soft lamplight casting shadows that seemed to reach for her with accusing fingers. "Sit." Lady Fortescue gestured to a straight-backed chair positioned before her own more comfortable seat, a deliberate arrangement that emphasized the difference in their stations. "I will not dissemble, Miss Thorne. I saw you return from the lake." Arabella's heart contracted. "My lady." "I saw you return from the lake," Lady Fortescue continued, her voice flat and hard, "approximately 10 minutes after the Duke of Thornwood returned from the same direction. Your hair was disordered, your cheeks were flushed, and unless you have developed a sudden passion for lake-watching that manifests in physical agitation, I believe I can draw certain conclusions." There was no point in denial. Lady Fortescue was many things calculating, ambitious, occasionally cruel, but she was not stupid. "I can explain," Arabella said quietly. "Can you?" Lady Fortescue leaned forward, her eyes glittering. "Can you explain why my paid companion, a woman of no fortune and no consequence, has apparently been conducting a clandestine romance with the most eligible bachelor in England? A bachelor I invited here specifically to court my daughter? It was not I did not plan. I don't care what you planned." Lady Fortescue's voice cracked like a whip. "I care about results. I have spent 3 years employing you to discourage unsuitable suitors from approaching Cecily. You have performed this function admirably. But now, it seems, you have decided to redirect your talents toward attracting a suitor for yourself, and not just any suitor, but the Duke of Thornwood himself." "That is not what happened." Arabella forced herself to meet her employer's gaze steadily. "I did not seek his attention. He sought mine. And you did nothing to discourage him. You, who can bore a man to tears within 5 minutes of conversation?" Lady Fortescue's laugh was bitter. "Forgive me if I find that difficult to believe." Arabella's hands clenched in her lap. The accusation stung because it contained a kernel of truth. She had tried to bore Sebastian away at first. But when that failed, when he saw through her performance and sought her company anyway, she had not tried very hard to resist. "The Duke is not a man who can be easily discouraged," she said carefully. "He is accustomed to pursuing what he wants. And what he wants, apparently, is you." Lady Fortescue rose from her chair and moved to the window, her back rigid with anger. "Do you have any idea what you have done? This house party was meant to secure Cecily's future. The Duke of Thornwood could have elevated her to the highest ranks of society, given her a life of comfort and consequence. Instead, he has been distracted by she could not seem to find a word scathing enough. "A companion," Arabella supplied quietly. "A vicar's daughter. A woman who should have known her place." Lady Fortescue turned, and her expression was terrible in its cold fury. "Yes, a woman who should have known her place." The words hung between them, weighted with years of unspoken hierarchy. Arabella had always known her position, had accepted it, even as the necessary price of survival. She had never resented Lady Fortescue's condescension, because condescension was simply how the world worked. Those with money and breeding looked down upon those without. It was as natural as rain falling downward. But now, with Sebastian's kiss still burning on her lips, and his promises still ringing in her ears, the old acceptance felt less like wisdom and more like cowardice. "What would you have me do?" she asked. "I would have you remember who pays your salary." Lady Fortescue returned to her chair, composing herself with visible effort. "I would have you remember that your mother's care depends upon your continued employment. I would have you remember that without my reference you will find no respectable position anywhere in England." The threats were not subtle. They were not meant to be. "You want me to discourage him," Arabella said flatly. "I want you to disappear." Lady Fortescue's voice was ice. "For the remainder of the house party, you will remain in your room. You will take your meals there. You will not walk in the gardens, or visit the library, or appear in any space where the Duke might find you. If he asks after you, I will say you have taken ill a feminine complaint, nothing serious, but requiring rest and solitude. And if he does not believe you, he will believe me, because he will have no evidence to the contrary." Lady Fortescue smiled thinly. "You are a companion, Miss Thorne. You are invisible by profession. It should not be difficult to become invisible in truth." Arabella's throat tightened. The punishment was elegant in its cruelty, not dismissal, which would create a scandal and raise questions, but erasure. She would simply cease to exist in the Duke's world, and he would eventually conclude that whatever had passed between them was a fleeting fancy, easily forgotten. "And after the house party," she managed, "after the house party, we shall see. If the Duke leaves without further incident, we will return to London and continue as before. Your lapse in judgment will be forgotten, provided it is not repeated." Lady Fortescue's gaze sharpened. "If, however, you attempt to contact him, or if he somehow discovers the truth of your confinement, I will dismiss you without reference. You will never work in a respectable household again. Your mother's care will become your sole responsibility, and we both know you cannot afford it." The trap was complete. Arabella could see no escape. "Do we understand each other?" Lady Fortescue asked. "Yes." The word tasted like ash. "We understand each other perfectly." "Good. You may return to your room. I will have a tray sent up for dinner." Arabella rose and walked to the door on wooden legs. Her hand was on the handle when Lady Fortescue spoke again. "Miss Thorne," she turned, "I am not a monster." Lady Fortescue's voice held a note of something almost like regret. "I am simply a mother protecting her daughter's prospects. You must understand that." Arabella did understand. She understood that in Lady Fortescue's world, Cecily's future mattered infinitely more than Arabella's heart. She understood that money and breeding created hierarchies that compassion could not bridge. She understood that hope, for people like her, was a luxury with a price she could not pay. "Of course, my lady," she said. "Good evening." She left before the tears could fall. The room was small, but not uncomfortable. A narrow bed, a washstand, a single window overlooking the kitchen garden. Arabella had spent 3 years in rooms like this, temporary quarters in great houses where she existed at the margins of other people's lives. She had never minded the modesty of her accommodations. What use had she for luxury? But tonight, the walls pressed close, and the window seemed impossibly far away. She sat on the bed and let herself cry, properly cry, with great heaving sobs that she muffled in her pillow so no one would hear. She cried for the kiss by the lake, and the promises she had almost let herself believe. She cried for her mother, alone in Sussex, confused and fading. She cried for the woman she might have been, if fate had dealt her different cards. When the tears were spent, she washed her face, and changed into her nightclothes, and lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. Sebastian would look for her tomorrow. He would search the gardens and the library and all the quiet corners where they had found each other. When he could not find her, he would ask Lady Fortescue, who would explain with delicate concern that Miss Thorne had taken ill and was confined to her room. He would accept this explanation because what choice would he have? He could hardly demand access to an unmarried woman's bedchamber. And as the days passed, as Arabella remained invisible, he would begin to doubt. He would wonder if he had imagined the connection between them. He would tell himself that perhaps it was for the best. A duke could not marry a companion, after all, no matter what he had said in the heat of the moment. Eventually, he would leave Fortescue Park and return to his life, and Arabella would return to hers, and the kiss by the lake would become nothing but a memory. It was the sensible outcome, the practical outcome, the outcome that kept her mother cared for and her own future secure. Arabella closed her eyes and tried to feel grateful for sensibility. She felt only emptiness. The first day of confinement was the hardest. Arabella woke to pale sunlight filtering through the window and the distant sounds of the household coming to life. She heard footsteps in the corridor, doors opening and closing, the murmur of voices. Somewhere below, breakfast was being served. The Duke would be there, she knew, scanning the room for her face and finding only its absence. A maid brought her a tray at 8:30 tea, toast, a coddled egg. The girl was young and nervous, clearly uncomfortable with the unusual arrangement. "Lady Fortescue says you're not to be disturbed, miss," she said, setting the tray on the washstand. "She says you need rest." "Thank you." Arabella summoned a wan smile. "I'm sure I'll be recovered soon." The maid bobbed a curtsy and fled, as if illness might be contagious even through conversation. Arabella ate mechanically, without tasting the food. When the tray was empty, she moved to the window and looked down at the kitchen garden, where herbs grew in neat rows, and a gardener's boy was pulling weeds. It was a small view, domestic and unremarkable, but it was the only view she had. She wondered what Sebastian was doing. Had he asked after her yet? Had Lady Fortescue delivered her prepared explanation? Was he, even now, accepting that explanation with the pragmatism of a man accustomed to disappointment? The morning stretched into afternoon. The afternoon stretched into evening. Another tray arrived. Cold meat, bread, cheese, a slice of cake. Arabella forced herself to eat, though hunger seemed distant and irrelevant. The sun set, painting the kitchen garden in shades of gold and rose, and still she sat at the window, watching shadows lengthen across the herbs. When darkness finally came, she was almost grateful. Darkness meant sleep, and sleep meant temporary escape from the prison of her own thoughts. She was preparing for bed when she heard it a soft tap at her door, so quiet she thought at first she had imagined it. The tap came again. "Miss Thorne?" A whisper, barely audible. "Arabella?" Her heart stopped. She knew that voice. She flew to the door and opened it a crack, just enough to see Sebastian's face in the dim corridor. He looked, dishevelled, his cravat loosened, and his hair disordered, as if he had been running his hands through it repeatedly. "You're not ill," he said. It was not a question. "You shouldn't be here." Arabella glanced past him, terrified that someone might see. "If Lady Fortescue is occupied with the other guests. They're playing charades." His mouth twisted. "I claimed a headache. How did you find me?" "I bribed the kitchen maid." He reached through the crack in the door and caught her hand, his grip warm and desperate. "Arabella, what is happening? I looked for you all day. Lady Fortescue said you were ill, but I knew something was wrong." Arabella's resolve wavered. She should send him away. She should close the door and return to her bed, and let the sensible outcome unfold as Lady Fortescue had planned. That was the safe choice, the practical choice. But Sebastian was looking at her as if she were the only thing in the world that mattered, and she could not make herself choose safety. "She knows," she whispered. "About us. She saw me returning from the lake." Sebastian's expression darkened. "And she confined you to your room, like a prisoner?" "She reminded me of my place." The words were bitter on her tongue. "She reminded me that I am a companion, a woman of no consequence, a servant who forgot her station." "You are not a servant." His grip on her hand tightened. "You are—" "What am I, Sebastian?" The question was raw with pain. "What am I really? A vicar's daughter who works for wages, a woman without fortune or family connections. I cannot host your dinner parties. I cannot navigate the complexities of ducal society. I cannot give you anything but myself, and myself is not enough to balance the scales." The scales do not need balancing. He pushed the door open wider, stepping into the doorway. Arabella, look at me. She looked. His grey eyes were fierce, burning with an intensity that stole her breath. I have spent my entire adult life being weighed and measured, he said, by society, by fortune hunters, by matchmaking mothers who saw nothing but my title and my income. Every relationship I have ever had has been a transaction. What can I gain? What must I sacrifice? What is the proper accounting? And then I met you, and you tried to bore me to death with sheep, and for the first time in 13 years, I felt like a human being instead of a ledger entry. Tears were streaming down Arabella's face. She did not bother to wipe them away. I cannot lose you. Sebastian's voice cracked. I cannot go back to the cold rooms, and the cold relationships, and the endless, crushing loneliness. Not now. Not when I finally know what warmth feels like. Lady Fortescue will dismiss me. She will ruin me. Then let her. He cradled her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away her tears. Come with me. Tonight. We will go to London, and I will procure a special license, and by the end of the week you will be the Duchess of Thornwood. Lady Fortescue cannot touch you then. The offer was dizzying in its enormity. To simply leave, to walk away from her careful life and step into an uncertain future, trusting nothing but this man's word and her own reckless heart. My mother, she said, I cannot leave without— We will fetch her, tomorrow, if you wish. She will live at Thornwood Manor in comfort and safety, with the best care money can provide. Sebastian's eyes searched hers. Arabella, I am offering you everything. Please, please let me give it to you. It would be so easy to say yes, to pack her few belongings and slip away into the night, leaving Lady Fortescue's schemes in ruins. She wanted to say yes more than she had ever wanted anything. But something held her back, some stubborn thread of pride that refused to let her be rescued like a princess in a fairy story. Not like this, she whispered. Sebastian's face fell. What? Not like this. She reached up to cover his hands with her own, pressing them against her cheeks. If we run tonight, it will look like guilt, like shame, like we have done something that requires fleeing in darkness. I will not begin our marriage as a scandal to be whispered about. I don't care about whispers. I know you don't, but I do. She met his eyes steadily, willing him to understand. I have been invisible for 3 years. I have been overlooked and underestimated and dismissed as beneath notice. If I am to become a duchess, I want to do it with my head held high, not slinking away like a thief in the night. Sebastian was silent for a long moment. She could see him struggling, his instinct to protect her warring with his respect for her autonomy. What do you propose? He asked finally. The house party continues for 5 more days. Let them continue. Arabella's voice grew stronger as the plan took shape in her mind. I will remain here, as Lady Fortescue demands. You will attend the gatherings and make polite conversation and give her no reason to suspect anything amiss. And when the house party ends, when we return to London, you will call upon me publicly. You will court me in the open, where all of society can see. And Lady Fortescue will have no grounds for objection. I will resign my position before she can dismiss me. I will secure new lodgings for myself and my mother. And when you propose, if you still wish to propose, it will be a choice freely made, without coercion or desperation. Sebastian's expression softened. You think I will change my mind in 5 days? I think 5 days of separation will prove whether this is real. She turned her head to press a kiss against his palm. I need to know, Sebastian. Not because I doubt you, but because I doubt myself. I have spent so long believing I am not worth wanting. Give me 5 days to learn otherwise. He closed his eyes, and she saw the struggle play out across his features. Impatience, frustration, and finally, reluctant acceptance. 5 days, he said. Not an hour more. Not an hour more. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and aching with promise. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright. 5 days, he repeated. And then I am coming for you, Arabella Thorne. Lady Fortescue and all the forces of proper society cannot stop me. I would not want them to. He slipped away into the darkness, and Arabella closed her door and leaned against it, her heart pounding, her lips still tingling. 5 days seemed an eternity, but it was an eternity with hope at the end of it, and hope was something she had not allowed herself in far too long. She returned to her narrow bed and slept better than she had in years. The second day was easier, knowing that the confinement had a purpose. Arabella occupied herself with reading. She had managed to rescue a novel from the library before her imprisonment began, a Gothic romance involving a haunted castle and a brooding hero who bore certain accidental similarities to a particular duke. She read for hours, losing herself in fictional troubles that seemed trivial compared to her own. In the afternoon, she was surprised by a visitor. "Miss Thorne?" A different voice at the door, higher and breathier. "It's Cecily. May I come in?" Arabella opened the door to find Cecily Fortescue standing in the corridor, looking genuinely concerned. Her golden curls were artfully arranged, her muslin dress was spotless, but her blue eyes held an expression Arabella had never seen before, intelligence masked by careful vapidity. "Miss Fortescue, you should not be here. Mamma is resting. She won't miss me for at least an hour." Cecily slipped into the room and closed the door behind her. "I had to see you. I had to know if what I suspect is true." Arabella tensed. "What do you suspect?" "That you are not actually ill. That Mamma has confined you here because of the Duke." Cecily's eyes searched her face. "That you and he have developed feelings for each other." There was no point in denial. Cecily was not as empty-headed as she pretended. "Yes," Arabella said quietly, "all of that is true." She expected condemnation, or anger, or hurt. After all, Cecily had been raised to expect the Duke's courtship. She had been dressed and positioned and presented for his approval like a prize to be won. Instead, Cecily's face broke into a smile of pure relief. "Thank God," she breathed. "Thank God." Arabella stared. "I beg your pardon? You don't understand." Cecily crossed to the bed and sat down, patting the space beside her in invitation. "I don't want to marry the Duke. I never wanted to marry the Duke. He terrifies me, frankly. All that cold severity, I would spend my entire life walking on eggshells, trying not to displease him." "Then why—" "Because Mamma wants it. Mamma has wanted it since the moment I turned 16, and she realized I might be beautiful enough to aim for the very highest prizes." Cecily's voice was bitter in a way Arabella had never heard from her. "I have been trained for this, Miss Thorne. Every dance lesson, every deportment lesson, every hour spent learning to make insipid conversation, all of it was designed to make me into the perfect duchess. No one ever asked if I wanted to be a duchess." Arabella sat down beside her, bewildered. "What do you want?" "I want—" Cecily hesitated, as if voicing the desire might make it vulnerable. "I want to marry Lieutenant James Hartley." "The naval officer? You know him? He attended your mother's card party last month. I spoke with him briefly." Arabella remembered a young man with honest eyes and a shy smile, so clearly out of his depth among the social sharks of the ton. "He seemed kind. He is kind. He is good and honest and true, and he looks at me like I am a person instead of a prize." Cecily's eyes filled with tears. "We met in Brighton last summer, when Mamma was taking the waters. He was on shore leave, and we started talking, and I love him, Miss Thorne. I love him desperately, and Mamma will never approve." Arabella's heart ached in recognition. Because he has no fortune. Because he has no fortune, no title, no connections. He is the son of a country doctor who joined the navy to make his way in the world. Cecily dashed away her tears with an impatient hand. Mamma would rather see me married to the Duke and miserable than married to James and happy. Have you told her how you feel? I have tried. She refuses to listen. She says I am too young to know my own heart, that I will thank her when I am a duchess with half the kingdom at my feet. Cecily laughed bitterly. As if kingdoms matter when your heart is somewhere else entirely. Arabella took the girl's hand and squeezed it gently. She had always thought Cecily shallow, empty, uninteresting, a pretty ornament, with no substance beneath the gilt. She had been wrong. Cecily was simply another prisoner, trapped by expectations she had no power to resist. I have an idea, Arabella said slowly. A way that might help us both. Cecily looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. What kind of idea? The Duke has no interest in marrying you. He has made that quite clear to me. Arabella chose her words carefully, aware of how much she was revealing. When the house party ends, he intends to court me openly. If he does so, your mother will have no choice but to accept that he was never truly within reach. And that helps me how? It creates a distraction. While society gossips about the Duke's unsuitable choice, your mother will be occupied managing the scandal. And scandals, as I have observed, tend to breed more scandals. If you and Lieutenant Hartley were to present her with a fait accompli during the chaos. Cecily's eyes widened. You mean elope? I mean nothing of the kind. Arabella's voice was prim, but her eyes sparkled. I am simply observing that distracted mothers sometimes fail to notice what is happening under their noses. What you do with that observation is entirely your own affair. For a long moment, Cecily simply stared at her. Then she burst into laughter, real laughter, not the practiced tinkle she deployed at social gatherings. Miss Thorne, she said, I have spent 3 years thinking you were the most boring woman in England. I owe you a profound apology. No apology necessary. The boring woman was a performance. A very convincing one. Cecily sobered slightly. You truly love him, the Duke. The question deserved honesty. I truly do. And he loves you? He says he does. In 5 days I will know whether to believe him. Cecily nodded slowly, a new respect in her gaze. Then I hope, for both our sakes, that the next 5 days bring us everything we desire. She slipped out as quietly as she had come, and Arabella was left alone with the strange warmth of unexpected alliance. The 3rd day brought a different kind of visitor. Arabella was reading by the window when the door opened without warning, and a woman swept in as if she owned the room and everything in it. She was perhaps 60 years old, with iron-grey hair beneath an elaborate cap, and cold blue eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of Arabella's modest accommodations with withering disapproval. So, the woman said, you are the companion. Arabella rose and curtsied, her heart sinking. She knew, without being told, exactly who this was. Your Grace, I am Miss Thorne. The Dowager Duchess of Thornwood Sebastian's formidable aunt surveyed her with the expression of a woman examining a particularly disappointing specimen. I arrived this morning, the Dowager said. Lady Fortescue was kind enough to apprise me of the situation. The situation, Your Grace? Do not play coy with me, girl. I am too old and too ill-tempered for games. The Dowager settled herself into the room's single chair, leaving Arabella standing. My nephew has developed an inappropriate attachment to you. Lady Fortescue hopes I can make him see reason. Arabella's chin lifted. And what does reason look like, in your Grace's estimation? Reason looks like Sebastian marrying a woman of suitable birth and breeding, producing heirs to continue the Thornwood line, and fulfilling the obligations that come with his title. The dowager's voice was clipped, precise, without warmth. It does not look like throwing himself away on a penniless companion with delusions above her station. The words stung as they were meant to, but Arabella had endured 3 years of invisibility. She had learned to let barbs pass through her without drawing blood. "I have no delusions, Your Grace. I am fully aware of my station." "Are you? Then you must also be aware that a connection between you and my nephew would be disastrous for everyone involved. You would be ostracized by society. Your children would be tainted by their mother's inferior origins. And Sebastian would be mocked, pitied, dismissed as a fool who let sentiment override sense. Perhaps, society would eventually accept that a man has the right to choose his own wife, regardless of her origins." The dowager laughed a harsh, humorless sound. "You are either naive or stupid. Society does not forgive transgressions against the natural order. A duke who marries a companion becomes a figure of ridicule. His influence wanes, his connections sour, his legacy is compromised. You would be condemning Sebastian to a half-life on the margins of the world he was born to command." Arabella's resolve wavered. The dowager was painting a picture she had not fully considered, a future where Sebastian's choice of wife became a millstone around his neck, dragging him down into irrelevance and regret. "I love him," she said quietly. "Is that worth nothing?" "Love." The dowager spoke the word as if it were a foreign language she did not care to learn. "Love fades. Love disappoints. Love cannot heat a house or fill a nursery or secure a dynasty. I loved my own husband desperately when we married, and within 10 years I could barely stand to be in the same room with him. Affection is a poor foundation for a lifetime partnership." "Then what would you have me do?" "I would have you disappear." The dowager rose from her chair, her movements stiff with age but still commanding. "I would have you resign your position, remove yourself to whatever obscure corner of England you came from, and allow my nephew to recover from this temporary madness. In exchange, I am prepared to offer you a sum of money sufficient to keep you and your mother in comfort for the remainder of your lives." Arabella's breath caught. "You are offering to buy me off. I am offering you a practical solution. You claim to love Sebastian. Prove it by releasing him from an attachment that can only harm him." The dowager's eyes were chips of ice. "Take the money, Miss Thorne. Take it and go, and let my nephew find a wife worthy of his station." The offer was not without appeal. With sufficient funds, Arabella could ensure her mother's care indefinitely. She could take a small cottage somewhere quiet, live modestly but securely, never again worry about references or employment. All she had to do was give up Sebastian. All she had to do was give up hope. "No," she said. The dowager's eyebrows rose. "I beg your pardon?" "No." Arabella's voice was steady, surprising even herself. "I will not take your money. I will not disappear. And I will not release Sebastian from an attachment that he has chosen freely, with full knowledge of what it means. You will regret this, perhaps, but I would regret the alternative more." Arabella met the dowager's cold gaze with a warmth that was not defiance, but something deeper certainty, hard-won and unshakable. "Your nephew spent 13 years building walls to protect himself from pain. I helped him begin to tear those walls down. I will not abandon him now, when he is finally learning to feel again." The dowager studied her for a long moment. Something flickered in, those icy eyes, not warmth exactly, but perhaps a grudging acknowledgement. "You have more spine than I credited you with," she said finally. "It will not save you, but it is noted." She swept out without another word, leaving Arabella trembling in her wake. 2 days remained, 2 days until freedom, until Sebastian, until whatever uncertain future awaited them. Arabella returned to her window and stared out at the kitchen garden, no longer seeing the herbs and the weeds and the gardener's boy. She was thinking of walls and how they crumbled, and whether the rubble could become the foundation of something new. The fourth day brought a letter. It arrived with her breakfast tray, slipped beneath the plate of toast, as if the maid feared discovery. Arabella's heart leapt when she recognized Sebastian's bold handwriting. "My dearest Arabella, I am going mad. The house party continues with its tedious rituals, and I am expected to participate as if my heart were not locked in a room 3 floors above me. Lady Fortescue simpers, Miss Fortescue speaks of the weather, and my aunt delivers increasingly pointed remarks about the importance of suitable marriages. I smile and nod and count the hours until I can see you again. My aunt tells me she visited you. She will not say what transpired, but I observed that she seemed unsettled when she returned. I can only imagine what you said to discompose her. She has not been discomposed since 1793. One more day. One more endless, interminable day, and then I will come for you properly. I have already written to my solicitor about the special license. I have already sent word to Thornwood Manor to prepare for our arrival. Everything is ready, Arabella. Everything except these final hours that stretch between us like centuries. Wait for me. Trust that I am coming, and know that every moment of separation only confirms what I already knew. You are worth waiting for, and I will wait as long as necessary. Yours, in certainty and hope." Sebastian Arabella pressed the letter to her heart and let the tears fall. The 5th day dawned grey and rainy. Arabella woke early, too anxious to sleep. Today was the last day of the house party. Today the guests would pack their trunks and order their carriages and disperse to their respective corners of England. Today, at last, her imprisonment would end. She dressed carefully in her best dress, a pale blue muslin that she had purchased with her first wages years ago and worn only on special occasions. She pinned her uncooperative hair as neatly as she could manage without a lady's maid. She pinched her cheeks to bring colour to her face and practised calm expressions in the small mirror above the washstand. When the summons came, she was ready. "Lady Fortescue requires your presence in the drawing-room." The maid's voice was carefully neutral. "She says, immediately." Arabella descended the stairs with her heart pounding, unsure what awaited her. Had Sebastian announced his intentions? Had Lady Fortescue discovered the letters? Had the Dowager convinced Sebastian to abandon his pursuit? The drawing-room was crowded when she entered. The house-party guests had assembled for their final farewells, the Pembertons, the Cranes, Frederick Waverley, and at the centre of it all, Lady Fortescue, resplendent in crimson silk and radiating barely contained fury. Sebastian stood by the fireplace, his face set in lines of careful control. The Dowager sat nearby, watching with an expression of grim resignation, and Cecily. Cecily was nowhere to be seen. "Miss Thorne," Lady Fortescue's voice cut through the murmured conversations like a blade. "How kind of you to join us. I trust you are recovered from your illness." "Quite recovered, my lady." "Excellent. Then perhaps you can explain this." Lady Fortescue thrust a piece of paper toward her, a letter, Arabella realized, written in Cecily's flowing hand. "Dearest Mamma, by the time you read this, I will be on my way to Scotland with Lieutenant James Hartley. We plan to marry at Gretna Green as soon as we arrive. Please do not try to follow us. We have too great a head start, and our minds are quite made up. I know you will be angry, and I am sorry for the pain this causes. But I cannot marry the Duke of Thornwood, or anyone else you might choose for me. I love James, and he loves me, and that must be enough. I hope in time you will forgive me. I hope you will come to know James and see that he is a good man who will make me happy. And I hope you will remember that your own marriage, arranged for advantage, brought you no joy, and ask yourself whether you truly wanted the same fate for your daughter. With love and apology, Cecily Arabella read the letter twice, her heart simultaneously sinking and soaring. Cecily had done it. She had actually done it, fled into the night with her lieutenant, choosing love over duty, freedom over security. "Well?" Lady Fortescue's voice shook with rage. "What do you have to say?" I had no knowledge of this, my lady." "Liar!" Lady Fortescue stepped closer, her face mottled with fury. "Cecily visited you in your room. She spent an hour in your company, during which I have no doubt you encouraged her in this madness. You poisoned her mind against me, against the brilliant match I had arranged." "She arranged no match." Sebastian's voice cut through the tirade, cold and sharp. "Miss Fortescue was never in danger of receiving an offer from me. My intentions lay elsewhere entirely." Lady Fortescue whirled on him. "Your intentions? Your intentions have ruined everything. If you had simply done as you were supposed to, courted my daughter, made her an offer, none of this would have happened." "I was not supposed to do anything. I came to this house party because I wished to, not because Lady Fortescue willed it." Sebastian moved from the fireplace to Arabella's side, his hand coming to rest at the small of her back. "And I have been waiting 5 interminable days to make my own announcement." The room fell silent. Even Lady Fortescue's fury seemed to pause, suspended in shocked anticipation. "Miss Thorne has done me the honour of accepting my proposal of marriage," Sebastian said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "We will be wed by special licence as soon as one can be procured. I trust this news will not unduly distress anyone present." Lady Fortescue made a sound like a kettle coming to boil. "This is outrageous," she hissed. This is wonderful news," Lady Pemberton interrupted, bustling forward with a warm smile. "Simply wonderful. May I offer my congratulations, Your Grace, Miss Thorne?" The other guests, sensing the direction of the wind, quickly added their own felicitations. Even Frederick Waverley managed a genuine smile, though whether for the engagement or for the entertaining spectacle of Lady Fortescue's apoplexy was unclear. Only the Dowager remained silent, her icy eyes fixed on Arabella with an expression that was impossible to read. "You!" Lady Fortescue spat, focusing her wrath on Arabella. "You scheming, manipulative—" "Careful!" Sebastian's voice dropped to a register that promised consequences. "That is my future wife you are addressing. I suggest you choose your next words with care." Lady Fortescue vibrated with suppressed fury. For a moment, Arabella thought she might actually strike someone, but self-preservation won out over rage. "Get out," she said instead. "Both of you. Get out of my house and never return." "With pleasure." Sebastian offered Arabella his arm. "My carriage is waiting. Shall we?" Arabella took his arm, feeling as if she were walking through a dream. The other guests parted before them, whispers rising in their wake. Lady Pemberton pressed her hand with genuine warmth. Sir Richard Crane offered a stiff bow that somehow conveyed approval. They were almost to the door when the Dowager's voice stopped them. "Sebastian." He turned, his expression guarded. "Aunt?" The Dowager rose from her chair with the slow dignity of age, crossing the room to stand before them. Her cold eyes moved from Sebastian to Arabella and back again, weighing and measuring. "You are making a mistake," she said. "Society will not forgive this. You will pay a price for your choice." "I know." Sebastian's voice was steady. "I choose it anyway." The Dowager was silent for a long moment. Then, incredibly, her stern mouth curved into something that was almost a smile. "Your father was the same," she said quietly. "Stubborn beyond reason, determined to follow his heart regardless of consequence. I thought it weakness. Perhaps I was wrong." She turned to Arabella, and her gaze softened infinitesimally. "You have spine, Miss Thorne. You will need it." A pause. "I will call upon you in London. We have matters to discuss regarding the management of a ducal household." It was not an embrace. It was not warm acceptance. But it was, Arabella realized, the closest, thing to a blessing the Dowager was capable of offering. "I would be honored, Your Grace," she said. The Dowager nodded once, sharply, and stepped aside. Sebastian and Arabella walked out of Fortescue Park together, into the grey morning and the waiting carriage and the uncertain future that stretched before them. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, uncertainty felt like possibility rather than threat. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The carriage rolled through the Kent countryside beneath a sky that could not decide between rain and sun, clouds breaking apart to reveal patches of pale blue before closing ranks again. Arabella sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching the hedgerows blur past the window, acutely aware of Sebastian's presence beside her, the warmth of him, the solid reality of him, the impossible fact of what had just occurred. She had walked out of Fortescue Park on the arm of a duke. She had walked out as his announced bride, in front of witnesses, with no possibility of retreat or denial. The thing she had believed impossible had happened, and now she sat in his carriage wearing her best blue dress and absolutely no idea what came next. "You're quiet," Sebastian observed. "I am trying to determine whether I am dreaming. Shall I pinch you? That would be undignified." But she smiled, and some of the tension in her chest eased. "Where are we going?" "London for the moment. I have a townhouse in Mayfair that will serve as our base while I procure the special license and make the necessary arrangements." He reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Unless you would prefer a grand wedding with all the attendant fuss. I confess I assumed you would want something quiet, but I should have asked." "Quiet," Arabella confirmed. "Definitely quiet. I have no family to invite, and the thought of standing before hundreds of strangers while they whisper about my unsuitability does not appeal." "Then quiet it shall be. The chapel at Thornwood Manor is small, but beautiful. We could be married there within the week, if you're willing." Within the week. Married within the week. Arabella's head spun with the speed of it all. "My mother," she said suddenly. "I cannot marry until I've seen her, until I've explained. We will go to her first." Sebastian squeezed her hand. "Today, if you wish. Sussex is not far. We can detour there before continuing to London." The offer was so simple, so matter-of-fact, that it took Arabella a moment to comprehend its significance. He was rearranging his plans for her. He was putting her needs before his own schedule. It was such a small thing, and yet it was everything. "You would do that?" "I would do considerably more than that." His grey eyes were soft when she looked at him. "Your mother is to be my family now, Arabella. Of course I wish to meet her." The tears came before she could stop them. Tears of relief, of gratitude, of overwhelming emotion that she had no words to express. Sebastian produced a handkerchief from somewhere and pressed it into her hands, saying nothing, simply letting her cry. "I'm not normally this weepy," she managed, after several mortifying minutes. "I imagine not. You have been stoic through rather extraordinary circumstances." His voice was gentle. "You are allowed to feel, Arabella. You are allowed to be overwhelmed. This has been a great deal." "A great deal," she laughed wetly. "I was confined to my room for 5 days, visited by your terrifying aunt, who attempted to bribe me into disappearance, and then walked out of a house party as a future duchess, while my former employer screamed accusations at my back. Yes, I suppose a great deal covers it." "My aunt attempted to bribe you? She offered a substantial sum to remove myself from your life and never return." Sebastian's expression darkened. "And you refused?" "Obviously." Arabella dabbed at her eyes with his handkerchief. "Though I confess the offer was tempting, not because I wanted to leave you, but because the money would have secured my mother's care indefinitely. For a moment, I considered it." "What changed your mind?" She met his eyes steadily. "You. The thought of you. The thought of returning to that cold, lonely existence while knowing that somewhere in England you were doing the same." Her voice softened. I couldn't bear it. Even for security, I couldn't bear the thought of a life without you in it. Sebastian leaned across the space between them and kissed her, properly, kissed her, with the privacy of the carriage allowing what the lake and the rose garden had not. His hands cradled her face, his mouth moved over hers with tender urgency, and Arabella let herself sink into the sensation without fear or reservation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Sebastian rested his forehead against hers. 5 days, he said. 5 days of imagining exactly this, and the reality exceeds the imagination. We should probably maintain some decorum. We are not married yet. A temporary condition that I intend to remedy with all possible speed. But he released her, settling back against the carriage seat with an expression of reluctant virtue. Sussex first, then London, then Northumberland, and the rest of our lives. Arabella tucked the handkerchief into her sleeve. She would return it later, laundered and pressed, and turned to watch the countryside roll past the window. The clouds were parting more frequently now, letting through golden shafts of sunlight that illuminated the fields and hedgerows like benedictions. For the first time in years, the future looked bright. The cottage in Sussex was smaller than Arabella remembered. She had last visited 3 months ago, staying for 2 precious days before the demands of her position called her back to London. At the time, the thatched roof and whitewashed walls had seemed charming, the small garden full of promise. Now, seeing it through Sebastian's eyes, she noticed the peeling paint on the window frames, the weeds encroaching on the flower beds, the general air of genteel shabbiness that characterized a household operating on too little money. "It's lovely," Sebastian said, and his voice held no trace of condescension. "It's modest. It's home." He helped her down from the carriage, holding her hand a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Your mother is fortunate to have a daughter who secured such a comfortable situation for her." The nurse, Mrs. Crawford, met them at the door, a capable woman in her 50s, whom Arabella had hired 2 years ago, when her mother's confusion grew too severe for her to live alone safely. She looked startled to see Arabella arriving unannounced, and even more startled to see the elegant gentleman at her side. "Miss Thorne, we didn't expect, that is, if you had sent word." "It's quite all right, Mrs. Crawford. This is an unexpected visit." Arabella stepped into the familiar front hall, breathing in the scent of lavender and beeswax that had always meant home. "How is my mother today?" Mrs. Crawford's expression grew cautious. "She has good moments and bad moments, miss. Today has been mixed. She asked for your father this morning, and when I reminded her he had passed, she became quite distressed." Arabella's heart clenched. "May we see her?" "Of course. She's in the sitting room by the window. She likes to watch the birds." The sitting room was small but sunny, furnished with pieces that Arabella recognized from her childhood. Her father's old armchair, now worn with use, the bookcase that had once held his theological texts, the embroidered cushions her mother had made in happier years. And by the window, in a chair positioned to catch the afternoon light, sat the woman who had given Arabella life. Eleanor Thorne had been beautiful once. Even now, traces of that beauty remained in her high cheekbones and the elegant shape of her hands. But her hair, once dark like Arabella's, had gone entirely white, and her hazel eyes, so like her daughter's, held a vagueness that spoke of a mind slowly retreating from the world. "Mamma." Arabella crossed the room and knelt beside her mother's chair, taking those elegant hands in her own. "Mamma, it's Arabella. I've come to visit." Eleanor's eyes focused slowly, travelling over her daughter's face, as if searching for something familiar. For a terrible moment, Arabella feared she would not be recognized, feared that today would be one of the bad days, when her mother looked at her as a stranger. Then Eleanor smiled, and the years fell away. "Arabella," her voice was thin but warm, My clever girl, you've come home. I've come home? Arabella blinked back tears. And I've brought someone to meet you. Someone important. She looked over her shoulder at Sebastian, who had remained by the doorway, watching the reunion with an expression of profound gentleness. He came forward now, moving slowly, so as not to startle, and lowered himself into a chair positioned at Eleanor's eye level. "Mrs. Thorne." His voice was soft, stripped of its usual formality. "It is an honor to meet you. My name is Sebastian Hale." Eleanor studied him with the frank curiosity of a child. "You're very tall." "I am, rather. My mother despaired of finding me dancing partners. And very handsome." Eleanor's gaze sharpened slightly, some echo of her old wit surfacing. "Are you courting my daughter?" "I am marrying your daughter if she will have me." Eleanor turned to Arabella, her brow furrowed. "Is this true?" "It's true, Mamma." Arabella squeezed her mother's hands. "I am to be married, and you will come to live with us in a beautiful house in the North Country. You will have your own rooms and a garden to walk in, and someone to care for you always." For a long moment, Eleanor said nothing. Arabella watched emotions flicker across her mother's face. Confusion, wonder, and then finally, a joy so pure it hurt to witness. "My clever girl," Eleanor whispered. "I always knew you would find your way." She did not entirely understand what was happening. Arabella could see that. Tomorrow, or perhaps even this evening, she would forget this conversation. Forget that Sebastian had visited. Forget the promise of a new home. But in this moment, in this single precious moment, she understood enough to be happy. And for now, that was sufficient. They stayed for 2 hours. Sebastian charmed Eleanor with stories of his estates, describing the gardens at Thornwood Manor in such detail that she could almost see them. Mrs. Crawford served tea and watched the Duke with barely concealed amazement, and Arabella sat beside her mother, holding her hand, savouring the simple gift of presence. When it was time to leave, Eleanor caught Arabella's sleeve. "Your father would approve," she said, with one of those flashes of clarity that appeared without warning. "He always said you deserved a man who would see your worth. This one sees it." "How do you know?" "The way he looks at you." Eleanor smiled, distant now, already retreating. "He looks at you the way your father looked at me." Arabella kissed her mother's forehead and promised to return soon with a carriage to bring her north, to her new home, to the life she could not quite imagine, but was somehow destined to live. In the carriage miles later, Sebastian found her hand in the darkness. "She is remarkable," he said quietly. "I can see where you get your strength." "She was so much more before," Arabella's voice caught. "So sharp, so witty, so full of life. Watching her fade has been the cruelest kind of loss. I know." He lifted her hand to his lips. "She will be comfortable at Thornwood. I will make certain of it. The best doctors, the kindest nurses, everything money can provide. Money cannot restore her mind. No, but it can ensure she spends her remaining years in peace and dignity." He met her eyes in the dim light. "You have carried this burden alone for too long. Let me help you carry it now." Arabella leaned against his shoulder, letting the tears fall. Tears of grief and gratitude intermingled, the complex sorrow of loving someone who was slowly disappearing. Sebastian held her without speaking, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of her emotions. She had thought she understood what it meant to be loved. She had been wrong. This quiet strength, this willingness to share burdens, this gentle acceptance of all that she was and all that she carried, this was love. And it was more than she had ever dared to imagine. London whirled past in a blur of activity. Sebastian's townhouse in Mayfair was elegant without being ostentatious, filled with comfortable furniture and warm lighting, and an army of servants who materialized whenever anything was needed. Arabella was installed in a guest suite that was larger than the entire Sussex cottage, with a lady's maid assigned to attend her who seemed genuinely delighted by the assignment. "His Grace has been alone too long," the maid Mary confided, while helping Arabella dress for dinner. "The staff have worried. A great house needs a mistress, and more than that, a good man needs a good wife, if you'll forgive me saying so, miss. I'm hardly a traditional choice for Duchess." "Traditional is overrated." Mary's eyes twinkled. "My mum was a fisherman's daughter who married a banker's son. Caused quite the scandal in her day. They were happy for 40 years until he passed. God rest him. Love doesn't care about tradition." The special license was procured with a speed that suggested money could move mountains when properly motivated. Within 3 days, all was in readiness. The chapel at Thornwood Manor was prepared. The servants were notified. The vicar was engaged. The only remaining obstacle was the journey north. But before they departed, there was one more piece of business to address. Arabella received word on the 3rd morning that Lady Fortescue had called. She was waiting in the smaller drawing-room, the note said, and had indicated she would not leave until she had spoken with Miss Thorne. "You don't have to see her," Sebastian said, his expression dark. "I can have her removed." "No." Arabella smoothed her skirts and lifted her chin. "I need to face her, for my own sake, if nothing else." Lady Fortescue looked diminished somehow, as if the events at the house-party had stolen something essential from her. She sat rigidly in a straight-backed chair, her face pale beneath artful cosmetics, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles showed white. "Miss Thorne." Her voice was flat, stripped of its usual imperious tone. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." Arabella remained standing, not from discourtesy, but from an instinct that sitting would concede some advantage. "What do you want, Lady Fortescue?" "I want—" Lady Fortescue stopped, seemed to struggle with something internal. "I want to apologize." Of all the things Arabella had expected, this was not among them. "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me." The words emerged with obvious difficulty. "I behaved abominably. I confined you to your room like a prisoner. I threatened your livelihood and your mother's care. I accused you of scheming and manipulation when you had done nothing but—" She faltered. "Nothing but attract the attention of a man I wanted for my own daughter." "Why are you telling me this?" Lady Fortescue looked up, and Arabella was startled to see tears glistening in her eyes. "Because I have lost my daughter. She is married now, to her lieutenant in Scotland beyond my reach. She has written to say she is happy, but she will not come home. She says she cannot trust me to accept her choice." "Can she?" A long pause. "I don't know. I thought I was protecting her. I thought I knew what was best, a brilliant match, security, position. It never occurred to me that she might want something different, that she might be willing to sacrifice everything I valued for something I thought worthless. Love is not worthless. Perhaps not." Lady Fortescue's voice cracked. "But I was raised to believe it was. My own marriage was arranged, Miss Thorne. I went to my wedding bed having never exchanged a private word with my husband. We learned to tolerate each other in time, but love, genuine love, was never part of our arrangement. I did not know it could be otherwise." Arabella felt an unexpected stirring of compassion. She had always seen Lady Fortescue as an obstacle, an enemy, a source of threat and constraint. She had not considered her as a woman shaped by her own experiences, limited by her own blindness. "What do you want from me?" she asked more gently. "Forgiveness, if you can offer it. Not for my sake, I know I don't deserve it, but for my own peace of mind. I need to know that the wrong I did, you will not follow me forever." Arabella considered the request. She thought of the 5 days in that small room, the fear and uncertainty, the threats that had kept her awake at night. She thought of the moment when Lady Fortescue had publicly humiliated her, revealing her secret role to an audience of gossips and critics. But she also thought of Cecily, brave Cecily, who had seized her chance at happiness despite everything. And she thought of Sebastian, who had fought for her without hesitation or apology. And she thought of her mother, who would soon live in comfort and safety because of the choice Arabella had made. Lady Fortescue's cruelty had set certain events in motion, but the events themselves had led, by winding paths, to unexpected blessings. "I forgive you," Arabella said. Lady Fortescue's composure crumbled. She pressed a handkerchief to her eyes, her shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs, and for a moment she was not the imperious society matron, but simply a woman confronting the consequences of her choices. "Thank you," she managed. "Thank you. I know I don't deserve—" "You don't," Arabella agreed. "But forgiveness has never been about deserving. It's about choosing peace over bitterness." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Lady Fortescue, if you wish to reconcile with your daughter, you might begin by writing to her. Not to apologize, apologies are easy. Write to ask about her life. Ask about her husband. Ask what makes her happy. Show her that you are trying to see the world through her eyes, not just your own." Lady Fortescue nodded, still weeping, and Arabella left her there among the elegant furnishings and the weight of her own regrets. They departed for Northumberland the following morning. The journey took 4 days, with comfortable stops at respectable coaching inns, where Sebastian had arranged the best rooms in advance. Arabella spent the hours watching the landscape transform as they travelled north the gentle hills of the southern counties, giving way to wilder country, heather-covered moors and ancient forests, and skies so vast they seemed to press down upon the earth. "You're smiling," Sebastian observed on the 3rd day. "I'm thinking about how strange life is." Arabella turned from the window to face him. "6 weeks ago, I was standing by a fern at the Ashmore ball, trying to bore Lord Blackwell into retreat with sheep facts. I believed myself destined for a life of invisibility, useful perhaps, but never truly seen. And now, and now, and now, I am in a carriage travelling to marry a duke. The same duke I tried to bore away, I might add, who refused to be bored." "Your sheep facts were charming." Sebastian's eyes crinkled with amusement. "I had never before met a woman who could discuss Cheviot breeding with such passionate intensity. It was simultaneously the most absurd and the most attractive thing I had ever witnessed. I was trying to make you leave." "I know. That made it even more attractive." He reached for her hand. "You were performing, but the performance was so committed, so thoroughly researched, that it revealed more about you than simple honesty would have. I saw your intelligence, your dedication, your willingness to do whatever was necessary to fulfill your obligations. I saw a woman of substance masquerading as a woman of air." Arabella felt warmth bloom in her chest. "You give me too much credit." "I give you exactly the credit you deserve." He lifted her hand to his lips. "You sold yourself short for years, Arabella. You convinced yourself that you were invisible, that you were beneath notice, that you deserved nothing more than the margins of other people's lives. But you were wrong. You have always been extraordinary. You simply needed someone to reflect that truth back to you." "And you?" She searched his face. "Who reflects your truth?" "You do." His voice was quiet, serious. "You saw through my walls on the first evening we met. You recognized that my coldness was armor, not nature. You refused to be intimidated by my reputation or awed by my title. You treated me as a man, flawed, wounded, human, and in doing so, you gave me permission to be human again." The carriage rattled on, carrying them north. Arabella leaned against Sebastian's shoulder, watching the wild country roll past, thinking about masks and walls and the strange alchemy by which two damaged people might together become whole. Thornwood Manor rose from the Northumberland landscape like something out of a dream. It was ancient centuries old, Sebastian told her, built and rebuilt over generations until it had become a rambling collection of towers and wings and courtyards that should not have harmonized, but somehow did. Grey stone walls caught the afternoon light, softening into warmth. Windows glittered like watching eyes. And behind it all, the moors stretched to the horizon, purple with heather, wild and windswept, and impossibly beautiful. "Oh," Arabella breathed. "Is that a good O, or a concerned O?" "It's a overwhelmed O." She pressed her hands to the carriage window like a child. "Sebastian, it's magnificent. I had no idea you said it was draughty, and in need of repair. It is draughty, and perpetually in need of repair, but it's also home." He was watching her reaction with barely concealed anxiety. "Do you like it?" "Like it?" She turned to stare at him. "I love it. I love it already, and I haven't even gone inside." The tension in his shoulders eased. "I was worried. It's so remote. London is days away, and the weather can be brutal in winter. Some find it oppressive, all this isolation." "I find it peaceful." Arabella looked back at the manor, at the vast sky above it, at the moors rolling away in every direction. "I have spent 3 years in crowded ballrooms and cramped servants' quarters, always surrounded by people, but always alone. This feels like space to breathe, space to be." Sebastian made a sound that might have been relief, might have been joy. He caught her hand and held it tightly as the carriage swept up the drive, past gardens that were slightly overgrown and lawns that were slightly wild, to the great front doors where a small army of servants waited to greet their new mistress. Arabella descended from the carriage and stood for a moment, looking up at the ancient walls, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down upon her. She was about to become mistress of all this, the house, the lands, the tenants, the legacy. The responsibility was staggering. But Sebastian was beside her, his hand warm in hers. And she was not alone. For the first time in her adult life, she was not alone. "Welcome home," he said softly. And she knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic or reason, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The wedding took place 3 days later, on a morning of unexpected sunshine. The chapel at Thornwood Manor was small and very old, with thick stone walls and narrow windows that let in shafts of golden light. Arabella walked down the aisle in a simple cream dress hastily, altered from one of Sebastian's late mother's gowns, with a bouquet of heather and wildflowers gathered from the moors that morning. There were no guests, only the vicar and 2 servants who served as witnesses, and the ancient silence of the place itself. Sebastian waited at the altar, dressed in his finest clothes, but with an expression of such tender vulnerability that Arabella felt tears prick her eyes. He had been married before. In his heart, if not in law, had stood in anticipation of vows that were never spoken, had been publicly humiliated by a woman who found him unworthy. And yet here he was, willing to risk again, trusting again, opening his heart to the possibility of love. She reached him and took his hands, and the vicar began to speak. The words washed over her, ancient words, sacred words, words spoken by countless couples before them and countless couples to come. She heard them distantly, as if from under water, her attention focused entirely on Sebastian's face, on the emotion in his grey eyes, on the slight trembling of his fingers in hers. "I, Sebastian George William Hale, take thee, Arabella." His voice was steady, but she heard the effort it took to keep it so. He spoke his vows with the gravity of a man who understood what promises meant, who had learned through bitter experience the difference between words spoken lightly and words meant to last a lifetime. I, Arabella Catherine Thorne, take thee, Sebastian. Her own voice surprised her, clear, strong, without a trace of uncertainty. She had spent so long doubting her own worth, her own right to happiness. But in this moment, speaking these words to this man, she felt no doubt at all. She was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The ring was a simple gold band, worn thin by generations of Thornwood brides. Sebastian slipped it onto her finger, and she felt the weight of history settling around her, not as burden, but as blessing. I now pronounce you man and wife. Sebastian kissed her with the gentleness of a man handling something precious, something he could not quite believe he had been allowed to keep. Arabella kissed him back, and the chapel filled with golden light, and somewhere in the distance a lark was singing. They were married, against all odds, against all reason, against every force that had conspired to keep them apart. They were married. And as they walked out of the chapel into the Northumberland morning, Arabella felt something she had almost forgotten was possible. She felt complete. The first months of marriage were a revelation. Arabella had expected the adjustment to be difficult, learning the rhythms of a great house, understanding the responsibilities of a duchess, navigating the complex hierarchies of servants and tenants and local society. And there were challenges, certainly. She made mistakes. She forgot protocols. She occasionally offended people whose precedents she had not yet mastered. But Sebastian was patient, and the staff were kind, and gradually the unfamiliar became familiar. She learned which servants to trust and which to watch carefully. She learned which tenants needed assistance, and which needed only to be left alone. She learned the history of the estate, the relationships between families, the ancient customs that governed life in this remote corner of England. Most importantly, she learned that she was capable of far more than she had ever believed. "You're a natural," Sebastian told her one evening, as they sat together in the library that had become their favourite retreat. "Mrs. Hawkins told me you resolved the dispute between the groundskeeper and the head groom in less than an hour. She said they'd been feuding for months before you intervened." "It was obvious once you understood the real issue." Arabella set aside her book. "They weren't arguing about the stables at all. They were arguing about a girl in the village who'd shown interest in both of them. Once I pointed that out, they were embarrassed enough to make peace." Sebastian laughed, a real laugh, free and unguarded, the kind she heard more and more frequently as the weeks passed. He laughed now in a way he had never laughed before, as if some tight band around his chest had finally loosened. "You see people clearly," he said. "You understand what motivates them. It's a rare gift. 3 years of observing from the wallflower section. One learns things. Whatever the source, I'm grateful for it." He reached for her hand, drawing her from her chair to sit beside him on the settee. "This house has been waiting for someone like you. I have been waiting for someone like you." Arabella leaned into him, savouring the warmth of his body against hers. They were still learning each other the small irritations and unexpected delights of daily life together, the rhythms of intimacy that had no equivalent in courtship. But each day brought them closer, weaving their separate lives into something shared. Her mother had arrived a month after the wedding, installed in the dower house with Mrs. Crawford, and a new nurse Sebastian had hired, a woman of extraordinary patience, who specialized in caring for those whose minds had begun to wander. Eleanor had good days and bad days, as always, but her good days seemed more frequent here, surrounded by gardens and fresh air and the quiet peace of the countryside. "She asked for you this morning," Mrs. Crawford reported during one of Arabella's daily visits. "She said she wanted to see her daughter, the Duchess. She remembered that you married Miss Your Grace, I mean." "She remembered?" Arabella's heart leapt. "Clear as day. She said she always knew you'd find someone worthy of you. Then she asked about the wedding breakfast and whether there had been cake." It was such a small thing, a flicker of lucidity, a moment of connection. But Arabella treasured such moments like gems, storing them away against the darker days when her mother looked at her without recognition. Summer ripened into autumn, and autumn faded into winter. The moors turned from purple to gold to grey, swept by winds that howled around the ancient walls of the manor. Arabella discovered that Sebastian had not exaggerated about the draughts. There were passages where the cold seemed to seep through the very stones, resistant to any amount of fire or insulation. But there was also a fierce beauty in the winter storms, a drama she had never experienced in the gentler southern counties. She and Sebastian weathered the winter together, literally and figuratively. They learned each other's moods, adapted to each other's needs, built the small compromises and accommodations that transformed two individuals into a partnership. There were arguments, of course. Sebastian could be rigid in his opinions. Arabella could be stubborn in her own way. But the arguments never festered. They had both been alone too long to take companionship for granted. Spring came late to Northumberland, but when it came with fierce enthusiasm. The moors exploded into colour, the gardens awoke from dormancy, and Arabella, standing at her bedroom window one morning, felt a strange fluttering sensation that she did not at first recognize. She pressed her hand to her abdomen and went very still. It was too early to be certain, too early to hope. But her courses were late, and she had been tired in a way that suggested something beyond the ordinary demands of her new life, and that fluttering. She did not tell Sebastian, not yet, not until she was sure, but she found herself smiling at unexpected moments, touching her stomach when she thought no one was watching, wondering if perhaps, just perhaps, the family they both wanted was already beginning to take shape. The confirmation came 3 weeks later, delivered by the local physician with a beaming smile and hearty congratulations. "You are with child, Your Grace, approximately 2 months along by my estimation. I see no cause for concern. You are healthy and strong, but you should rest more than you have been and avoid undue exertion." Arabella walked back to the house in a daze. A child. She was carrying Sebastian's child. In 7 months, give or take, she would be a mother. She found him in his study, poring over estate accounts, with the focused intensity he brought to everything. He looked up when she entered, a smile already forming on his face, and then his expression shifted, became alert, as he read something in her bearing. "What is it? What's wrong?" "Nothing is wrong." She crossed to him, taking his hands, pulling him to his feet. Everything is very right. Sebastian, I have news." She told him. She watched his face as the words registered the shock, the wonder, the dawning joy that transformed his severe features into something radiant. "A child," he breathed. "Our child. Our child." He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of spun glass, as if she might shatter at the slightest pressure. She could feel him trembling, this man who never trembled, who maintained his composure through every trial. "I never thought—" His voice broke. "I had accepted. I thought I would die without—" "I know." She held him tighter. "I know." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, letting the magnitude of the moment wash over them. A child, an heir, a future taking shape where before there had been only uncertainty. Finally, Sebastian pulled back, his eyes wet, but his expression fierce with determination. "You will have the best care," he said, "the finest physicians, the most experienced midwife. I will not risk you. I cannot. I will be fine." Arabella touched his face. "Women have been having babies for thousands of years. I am healthy and young and surrounded by people who care for me. There is no need to fear. I will fear regardless. I will fear until I am holding our child in my arms and you are safe and well." He pressed his forehead to hers. "You have given me everything, Arabella. Everything I never believed I could have. I cannot lose you now." "You will not lose me." She spoke with a certainty she did not entirely feel. Childbirth was dangerous, she knew that. But his fear required comfort more than cold truth. "We will meet our child together, and we will raise them together, and they will grow up knowing what it is to be loved." Sebastian kissed her then deeply, thoroughly, with all the passion that had slowly unfurled between them over months of marriage. When they broke apart, both breathless, he was smiling in a way that erased years from his face. "I must write to my aunt," he said. "She will be insufferable about it. Of course she has been agitating for an heir since the day we married, but she should hear the news from us before the rumors reach her. She has been surprisingly cordial." Arabella still marveled at the dowager's transformation. The icy woman who had tried to bribe her into disappearing had become, if not warm, at least genuinely welcoming. "I believe she may have grown to approve of me." "She approves of results." Sebastian's tone was dry. "And you have delivered rather spectacular results. An heir to the dukedom tends to overcome even the most entrenched objections." "Charming. I'm glad to be useful." "You are far more than useful." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You are essential. You are irreplaceable. You are the center around which my entire life now revolves." It should have felt like pressure being the center of someone's world, but it didn't. It felt like coming home. 5 years later, the nursery at Thornwood Manor was filled with afternoon sunlight and the happy chaos of children at play. Arabella stood in the doorway, watching her son attempt to explain the principles of tower building to his younger sister, who was far more interested in knocking towers down. Thomas, 3 years old, grey-eyed and serious, had inherited his father's intensity and his mother's watchful nature. He approached everything with scholarly dedication, including the important business of blocks. Catherine, 18 months old, wild-haired and impish, had inherited neither parent's reserve. She attacked life with joyful abandon, laughing at obstacles and charming everyone who crossed her path. She would be a handful, Arabella knew. She already was a handful, but she was also a constant source of delight. "Thomas, you must share the blue blocks with your sister." "But she'll just knock them down." "That is what sisters do. It is their sacred calling." "It's not fair." Thomas's lower lip jutted out in a pout that reminded Arabella forcibly of his father in a temper. "I'm trying to build something." "Then build something she can help with. Perhaps she can pass you the blocks, and you can stack them." Thomas considered this compromise with evident suspicion, but Catherine was already toddling toward the block pile, her eyes bright with interest. Within moments, the two were engaged in a cooperative effort that involved Catherine handing blocks to Thomas with solemn importance, while Thomas pretended that her contributions were essential to his architectural vision. Arabella smiled and slipped away, leaving the nursemaid to supervise. She had duties to attend to, always duties, in a house this size, but she stole a few minutes to visit the dower house first. Her mother's condition had stabilized over the years, neither improving nor significantly declining. She still had good days and bad days. On good days, she knew Arabella and asked after the children, and reminisced about the past with clarity that seemed miraculous. On bad days, she retreated into confusion, asking for people long dead and fretting about concerns that no longer existed. Today was a good day. "The children are well?" Eleanor asked, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, her eyes focused and present. "They are wonderful. Thomas is determined to be an architect. Catherine is determined to be a force of nature." "Like her mother," Eleanor smiled. "You were a force of nature too, you know, even as a child, so determined, so focused on whatever goal you had set yourself. Your father used to say you would either rule the world, or drive it to distraction. And which have I accomplished? Both, I suspect. Eleanor's gaze drifted to the window, where the gardens were in full summer bloom. I am glad, Arabella, glad to have seen this. Glad to know you are loved. I am loved. Arabella took her mother's hand. And so are you. Always. The moment stretched, peaceful and complete. Then Eleanor's expression flickered, confusion clouding her features. Is it time for dinner? I should dress for dinner. The vicar is coming, isn't he? Your father will want me to look respectable. Not yet, Mamma. Arabella's heart ached, but she kept her voice steady. There's time yet. Rest a while longer. She stayed until Eleanor drifted into sleep then, kissed her forehead, and made her way back to the main house. Sebastian was in the library, his favourite room, still, though now it was cluttered with children's books and toys in addition to the scholarly volumes. He looked up when she entered, and his face transformed with the smile he reserved for her alone. How is she? Good today. She remembered the children. She talked about my father. Arabella crossed to sit beside him on the settee. She won't have many more good days, I think, but I'm grateful for each one. Sebastian put his arm around her, drawing her close. The physician says she could continue like this for years. The mind is unpredictable. I know, and I will be grateful for whatever time we have. Arabella leaned her head against his shoulder. Sebastian, do you ever think about how unlikely all of this is? That we should have met at all, let alone found our way to each other? I think about it constantly. His voice was quiet, reflective. I think about how close I came to dismissing you as beneath notice, how close I came to leaving that ball without speaking to you a second time, how many small decisions led us here. And you sent the sheep lecture. The sheep lecture was what caught my attention. The woman behind the sheep lecture was what kept it. He pressed a kiss to her hair. I was so tired, Arabella, so tired of performing, of being the Iron Duke, of maintaining walls that kept everyone at a distance. And then you tried to bore me to death with agricultural trivia. And instead of being boring, you were the most interesting person I had ever met. I was trying to make you leave. I know. That was part of what made it so charming. He chuckled softly. You were using your weapons against me, and I could see exactly what you were doing, and I was delighted by it. No one had ever fought me with sheep facts before. A specialized form of combat. Extremely specialized. You may be the only practitioner in all of England. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light change as afternoon faded toward evening. Through the open windows, they could hear the sounds of the estate going about its business, gardeners calling to each other, horses clattering in the stable yard, the distant laughter of children. I have been thinking, Sebastian said eventually, about Thomas. What about Thomas? He asked me today why his grandmother sometimes forgets who he is, and I found myself trying to explain about minds and memories and how they can slip away. He was very solemn, very thoughtful. Sebastian paused, and then he said that when he grows up, he's going to be a doctor and fix people's minds so they don't forget. Arabella's eyes filled with tears. He said that? He said that, with complete certainty, as if it were already decided. Sebastian smiled. He is so like you, Arabella. That determination, that conviction that problems can be solved if you simply try hard enough. He's like you too, that seriousness, that careful observation of everything around him. God help the world when he comes into his inheritance. A duke with his mother's determination and his father's stubbornness will be unstoppable. Arabella laughed, wiping at her eyes. Catherine will keep him humble. Sisters are good for that. Catherine will keep everyone humble. She is a force unto herself. Sebastian's arm tightened around her. Thank you, Arabella. For what? For all of it. For the children, for the marriage, for refusing to take my aunt's bribe and disappear, for seeing me when I was determined to remain unseen. His voice roughened with emotion. For teaching me that walls can come down, that love is not weakness, that life can be warm as well as cold. Arabella turned in his arms to face him, cupping his face in her hands. The grey eyes that had once seemed so severe were soft now, vulnerable in a way he allowed no one else to witness. "You taught me the same things," she said. "You saw me when I was invisible. You refused to let me bore you away. You chose me when choosing me was difficult, and you kept choosing me every day since. I will keep choosing you," he said, "every day for the rest of my life. You are the choice I will always make." He kissed her then, slow and deep, with the familiarity of 5 years and the passion of the first moment by the lake. Arabella kissed him back, pouring into it all the love she had once been afraid to feel, all the hope she had once been afraid to have. She had spent years making herself invisible, boring suitors away, hiding in corners, convincing herself that she was worth nothing more than a modest salary and a small room by the fern. She had believed, with the conviction of long practice, that wanting things was a luxury she could not afford. She had been wrong. She had been wrong about so many things, about herself, about her worth, about what was possible when you let yourself be seen. The woman who had tried to bore a duke away with sheep. Facts had become a duchess, a mother, a partner in the fullest sense of the word. She had found home not in a place, but in a person, in the grey-eyed man who had refused to be driven off, who had seen through her masks from the very beginning. Through the window she could hear Thomas and Catherine playing in the garden, their voices rising and falling with the eternal games of childhood. In the dower house, her mother dozed peacefully, safe and cared for, and here in the library, wrapped in Sebastian's arms, Arabella felt something she had never expected to feel. She felt completely, utterly, incandescently happy. The sheep lecture had been the beginning. This life, this love, this family they had built together was the happily ever after. And it was better than any novel she had ever secretly read.